Welcome to Project Arkangelos, Episode 8. It is Wednesday, the 18th of December, 2024, and I've committed to doing this once daily. Well, I wouldn't say I've committed to it, but it just seems to be unfolding that way, especially because my studies have finished for the year and I'm working a lot, and this is just an outlet for me. So just appreciate it because there will be periods where I don't make these for a while, okay? So it's kind of like there'll be a lot of episodes and then there might not be episodes for a while. So you can watch or listen to these at your own pace or you can ignore it. I would suggest embracing it. So it just seems to be unfolding that I'm making these daily for the time being. And just carrying on with the themes that I've been discussing, I've been talking about death, the soul, the nature of God, the nature of a creator, the originator or the origins of the cosmos, the universe, of life, of being itself, the ground of being. I've been contemplating these questions. This is what I think about, and this is what I don't really get to talk about in everyday interactions and in professional situations. And for me, thinking about this stuff helps me think clearer about the trivialities of life. It helps me straighten out my own mind and therefore helps me make better decisions. It reminds me of what actually matters in life. You don't have to agree with the contents of what I'm saying, but I hope this helps you think about what you think about, if you get me. Yeah, I like that notion. I'm not telling you what to think. I hope that I'm inspiring you as to how to think. Different kinds of questions to think about because we all get caught up in the minutiae of life. So I hope I'm reminding you of the bigger picture and to fill it in with your own pondering, your own wondering, your own content. I'm just offering what makes sense to me. I'm not telling you what to think. I just hope I'm guiding you towards thinking these things through for yourself. So, following on these themes, I've got some notes here. So, a lot of this to me comes down to the question of meaninglessness because there's this idea that life is meaningless. And I just don't think that's the case. I don't think that's the case at all. I actually think life is very meaningful. And I know that's like a buzz topic nowadays, like meaning, the crisis of meaning in the modern world. But I think it's true. It is a kind of crisis of the soul, of the human spirit. Like, what does anything mean? Is life just about acquiring money, building a strong body, being as popular as you possibly can, and owning property and investments? Is that what life is all about? Maybe to some people. But I'm not here to talk about that specifically. The angle that I take with meaninglessness that I was just thinking about was even if you take life to be meaningless, I feel like that is a type of meaning. If you say life is meaningless, to me, that is the meaning that you are attributing to life, that it is devoid of meaning. But to me, it's paradoxical because you're actually giving life a meaning by saying it's meaninglessness. It's meaningless. So to me, it doesn't even work. If you try to live as though life is meaningless, you are still attributing that meaning to life. So, first of all, it doesn't even make sense to me. Second of all, I think it's really irresponsible, personally, because if life is meaningless to you, then what does anything matter? You may as well just throw caution to the wind. And now, look, taking risk is important in life. Life is all about risk. But I personally think if you consider life to be meaningless, what's to stop you indulging in the temptations of the flesh? Why don't you just eat all the food, drink all the alcohol, take all the drugs? Why don't you just do that 24/7? Because life doesn't have any meaning, right? There are no consequences for actions, right? Because it's all just meaningless atoms bouncing around in a void. So you may as well indulge in the flesh. And I just personally feel like that will lead to more suffering, more of a sense of actual meaninglessness, a sense of misdirection, and you just won't be maximizing your potential. You won't be realizing your potential, and you will just be another lost soul, a wasted life, in my opinion. And you could say, well, I lived my life how I wanted to live. But it's also like, yeah, but did you live how you wanted to live? Or did you think how your ego or your smaller self wanted to live? How your passions wanted to live, how your senses wanted to live, but deeper down in your soul, is that how you really want to live? I don't think it is, personally. You may think otherwise, but I don't think that is fulfilling inner life, soul, God-like existence, sense, purpose. It, I don't think that is very fulfilling. I think you're just going to get sick, and you're just creating more pain for yourself. And life is already pain, life is already suffering. So why would you add more onto it? It's pleasure now, pain later, baby. Pain later. Pleasure now, pain later. So keep that in mind. And it's something I have to remind myself, something I have to remind myself of. It's a challenge, it's a tightrope that we all walk. But this just further proves my point that I do believe life has meaning. Because if it didn't have meaning, why do we feel bad when we make bad choices? Why do we get unhealthy? Why does it objectively get worse for our health, sense of well-being, when we consistently make unhealthy decisions? If life was meaningless, why wouldn't there just be no consequences for our actions? So I feel like there is meaning to life. Doesn't matter how and which way you slice it. You cannot escape meaning. It's kind of like, even if you scribble all over a page, you can kind of distinguish shapes from it. Or if you just like babble words without thinking about them, and just like, or write down a string of words, you'll be able to see some shapes and connect some form of meaning. Now, is it that humans have a meaning faculty, that we attribute meaning onto meaninglessness? Now, that's another question. That's another question, but I still think, well, I'd have to think that through, but I still think there is meaning. That's an interesting one. I do believe there is an objectivity to meaning. I think it's a bit of both. I think there's a subjectivity and I think there's an objectivity. There's a subjectivity in that each human attributes meaning differently to life's circumstances. But I also think there is an objectivity to meaning. I think there are things that most people agree upon which are bad, and there are things which most people will agree upon which are good. Now, of course, there are gray areas, but even if there's a disagreement, someone says this is bad, someone says it's good, there is still meaning inherent there, even though the values that humans attribute to that issue may vary. The fact of there being something there that people disagree upon, means that there is a fundamental meaning there to be made. So maybe that's what we are. We are the meaning machines. We give life meaning. But I personally feel like life has meaning inherent in it. I don't think we have the power to give life meaning. Maybe other philosophers would disagree. I feel like, yes, we do have the power to give life meaning, but I also suspect that perhaps we have the ability to uncover life's inherent meaning, and it is part of our responsibility and role as conscious entities to uphold and protect life's meaning. That's what I really think is going on. That's what I suspect is occurring. That is our role. That is our place as custodians of the earth, of the universe. We have to uphold the meaning that is implicit in the universe. No one has to tell us what something means. We generally know the meaning of things, and it's up to us to further inquire within ourselves as to what those things are and what values matter most to us. Because everybody has a unique life story, everybody has different values. It doesn't mean people don't care about certain things. Everybody cares about things, but everyone has different priorities as to the things they care about, just because of how life shapes everyone, as well as how genetics shape us. Genetics and our environment means we value and prioritize things different from each other, but what you can't escape is that we all have values and priorities. I think that is objectively a fact. Subjectively, we may differ in the contents of our values and the priorities of our values, but objectively, you cannot say that humans don't have values. Because even if you value meaninglessness, that is a value. If you value, what's the word, like overindulgence in the senses, that is a value. You can't really escape value. You can't escape meaning. You can try though. You can try dig yourself out of that hole, but it is a futile attempt. I'm sorry. It's kind of existentialist in the sense of existentialism being you are burdened with responsibility. You are burdened with the fact that you have free will and that your actions have consequences. So I just simplified existentialism for you. I just gave you the rundown so you don't have to get confused by looking up some philosopher and reading their convoluted texts. Existentialism is all about you, the individual, having free will and having somewhat the burden of responsibility and the burden of the fact that actions have consequences. Even the actions that you don't take, inaction has its own consequences. So, anyway, I digress. I had another point to make, but I've lost my train of thought. So, I think meaning is inherent in the universe, in humanity, and I think it's irresponsible to think otherwise. And I just don't even think it's true to think otherwise. I think you're deluding yourself. And I've got some other notes here. I don't know if it really ties in with what I've been talking about, but I can continue on. It's similar to what I've been talking about in recent episodes. Excuse me. So basically, what got me taking the question of God, the question of there being some ultimate purpose or meaning or some kind of force behind the universe that we live in, that we find ourselves in, and that we experience. What led me to contemplating that on an extremely deep level was the death of my mother, as I've discussed in previous episodes. So I think death and the loss of a loved one can make people contemplate the bigger questions of life. It certainly did for me. Now, it can also make people who once believed in God lose their faith because they feel like, why, God, would you let this happen? For me, I grew up not really having faith, not in the sense of I don't have any faith, not in a negative sense, but I just never really considered it on a deep level. It just wasn't a thing my family talked about. It wasn't talked about in school. I went to public school, which was very non-secular. Is that the term? Non-religious, non-secular. There was still like, we had scripture in school, in primary school, but when you're a kid, it's just like this thing you have to do. And I didn't really think about it on a logical and philosophical level. It just seemed like this is like a church thing that I associate with old men with beards. But that's about it. And I just want to play video games. But once you experience the death of the death of a loved one, the loss of someone close to you, it really makes you contemplate the nature of existence, the nature of life, because it feels like it doesn't make sense. It feels unfair. It doesn't even feel real. It makes you question reality and what is real, because it makes no sense whatsoever. Some part of you cannot come to terms with it. And over time, you can come to terms with the reality in the sense that you've accepted that the person is gone and they're not coming back. However, some fundamental part of you, I feel so far, like I'm nearly 5 years into experiencing grief, I feel like fundamentally some part of you struggles to let go, and it comes back in waves. And you'll find yourself doing some menial task, and all of a sudden you'll be thinking about some kind of memory with this person. And that may be the case for the rest of your life. That's what I suspect. Rather than assuming it's something that you get over, like, oh yeah, I'm over that. I'm over my ex-girlfriend. I'm over my ex-boyfriend. I'm so over you. This is something I don't think you ever get over. You get better at living with it and moving forward with your life, but it will still come back in waves because you have these memories. And I think that's part of the soul or the mind's inability to accept the reality. Maybe that's a signpost towards eternity, towards the eternal soul. Maybe the eternal soul is struggling to grasp with the present reality. Maybe it's the ego that can't accept death as final. Or maybe it's this struggle where the soul knows that there is no death because there is just a kind of oneness, that we are all the soul, but the ego, tricked ourselves into thinking we are separate beings. So maybe some part of us is the actual soul, and maybe we're all connected by the soul. Perhaps we are individual souls. Maybe we're all connected by the world soul, as Neoplatonism would label it. Yet it's just our ego that makes us feel like we are separate entities. And the word ego has many different senses and meanings. It's not even the best word to use. You could say like the self. That gets used a lot in Buddhism. It is our sense of self that deludes us into thinking that we are separate, and also that things are permanent. That's a huge theme in Buddhism, impermanence. And that is a huge cause of our suffering. This is like the Buddhist train of thought. And I highly recommend, there are people out there who are way more qualified than me to talk about this subject, but I'm just talking about it at face value for the sake of discussion. More to the point of, are we connected by this soul? Is it that we will be reunited with our loved ones at death? Does nothing happen at death? I don't think that's the case. I think either there is an afterlife, or our soul enters into another, whether it's into another being or another body, whether it's a human, an animal, a spirit, or consciousness enters into another state. We enter into another state of consciousness. Because I think consciousness has levels and layers. I think there may be things that go beyond human perception. And science proves this. This isn't just like some guy speculating. I mean, it is on some level, but science proves this. Look at the frequency spectrum of light. Look at the spectrum of light. The spectrum of visible light for human perception is like very small band, a very small frequency spectrum compared to the whole frequency of the whole spectrum of light. Humans can only perceive a very small portion of the total spectrum of light. Okay, so there are already things provable by science that are beyond human perception. Think about a dog whistle, like an actual dog whistle that humans can't really perceive. It's at a pitch that's too high for the human ear to perceive, but dogs obviously perceive it and they come running because they hear that dog whistle and they hear it loud and clear. So dogs obviously have, whether it's a higher perceptual, what do you call that? A higher frequency spectrum range, a higher range of hearing than humans, whether it's distributed greater or whether it's just shifted up, like they can hear higher but they can't hear as low as humans. I don't even know. How do you even tell? Scientists have figured it out, not me, that's for sure. But my whole point is, we already know, provable by scientific tools and observation and experimentation and hypothesis, that there is more than meets the eye. Transformers, more than meets the eye. Robots in disguise. Is that it? Anyway, there's more than meets the eye, the human eye. It's provable. It's science. So what is to say that there aren't more levels to consciousness? What is to say that there aren't different levels of entities? You know, we think about aliens. It's like in the news right now. It's the UFO, the flying saucer thing. I mean, they call them a different thing now. It's not UFO, it's like UPA. It's like unidentified something phenomenon. It's UAP, unidentified ambiguous phenomenon. It's something like that. It doesn't have to just be a flying object, but you get what I'm saying. Humans have this generalized perception of aliens as somewhat being humanoid creatures. But what if aliens are not physical? Okay? We talk about spirits, we talk about ghosts. What if there are higher intelligent beings that have transcended the physical form and they are simply invisible to human senses? How would you prove that? How would you prove that exactly? What if they are beyond the physical, so physical instruments can't detect them? There could be alien entities around us at all times. I know that sounds schizo, but how would you prove that if they are of a different substance than physicality? And we can't use physical instruments to detect them. I really suspect aliens to be interdimensional. I believe there's different layers to consciousness, and I wouldn't be surprised if there are beings, extraterrestrial beings, that have learnt how to evolve beyond the physical form. I don't think that's so far-fetched. That's why I don't really buy into aliens flying around in flying saucers, these like discs. I think if there are actual aliens, they're probably around us right now, hanging out. They're just hanging out. Think of any time you've experienced some uncanny form of psychic phenomena that you can't explain. The most obvious basic one is when you think of somebody and then they get in touch with you out of the blue all of a sudden. You haven't heard from them for years. You just have a thought about them, a memory comes back, and then suddenly they send a message to you. That's the obvious one. There's many examples that are like this, or you think about something. I mean, it's funny now with this technology, this surveillance capitalism, as they call it, because now you will literally think of something and the algorithm knows you so well based on what you search and what you buy, how long you visit a website for, how long you spend on social media, what kind of content that you view, that the algorithms can somewhat predict what you will be interested in. So humans have this experience of like, oh, the technology is reading my mind, but have you considered that perhaps you are way more predictable than you think you are? Maybe you are special, but also maybe you're not that special. What I mean by that is maybe you are more predictable than your ego leads you to believe. Not that I like using the word ego because it gets so misconstrued. It brings up a lot of misunderstanding. But what if you're more predictable than you realize? So the technology thing isn't such a great example, although it is kind of an example of uncanny psychic phenomena. But that perhaps is more explainable logically. Or it's like when your intuition tells you something and then that thing happens and you feel like, how did I know? I sensed something was off with that situation and I was correct. So some part of me knew better than I actually knew. Some deeper part of me was tapped into the frequencies of the cosmos. However you want to think about it, whatever words and symbols you want to attribute to that phenomenon. But I think everybody has had some kind of psychic phenomena, experiential experience where they've had something uncanny happen. And what's to say that extraterrestrial beings haven't tapped into that realm of psychic phenomena? Why do we assume they fly around in flying saucers? I think that is bullshit. I think the news is totally faking that. I think governments are kind of faking that shit right now. Because I think if there are aliens, they don't even have bodies. They've learned how to travel interdimensionally. They don't. And I know that's not a new idea, but I've arrived at that notion by my own logical faculties. It makes sense to me. Rather than traveling through the vast distances of space, wouldn't you travel through space? If space and time are two-dimensional, which there are theories, the holographic principle, or the idea that the universe is a hologram, and that the universe, I think I've talked about it in a previous episode, that the universe may be simply one-dimensional or two-dimensional information, and that human perception creates this hologram, and we think space and time are like this three-dimensional thing, or four-dimensional. But perhaps, and you hear people talking about extra dimensions, but what if there is just like one dimension and there are more evolved beings that have tapped into that and therefore can travel through space and time without using physical objects? Anyway, I'm just speculating. Now, I have more things I want to talk about, but it just didn't really flow with this particular monologue. So maybe next episode, this episode, I said I'd talk about action and how everything that changes in my life, or at least in my circumstance. Now, there are things that are beyond control, but everything that changes in a positive sense, like it, it comes back to the actions that I take. It doesn't just happen by some magical force or like manifesting and visualization. I think those things help you tune into what you really want, but you still have to take action. You still have to make a plan, make steps towards bringing that to reality. Otherwise, it's wishful thinking, in my opinion. So I wanted to talk about that, but I didn't get around to it. I also want to talk more about the nature of the originator of the universe, basically, until you get sick of it. But you can never really get sick of it because I think it's the most interesting thing that there could ever be to talk about and contemplate in life is, where did life come from? Why are we all here? I think that will never be not interesting. So you're going to hear me talk about it a lot, particularly in relation to consciousness and to the fact that we have language and we just take language for granted, even though it's a miracle that you can hear me right now, that you can understand me, and it's just no issue. You just understand the words that I'm saying. Maybe you'll interpret them differently, but you can't deny that you are perceiving these words and you don't really have to consciously think about their meaning. You just let them wash over you and your brain automatically decodes them. I don't think that's a coincidence. Anyway, so I want to discuss that at a later point. I better wrap it up for now. We've reached 30 minutes. So thank you for listening if you've made it this far. Please remember to like, share, follow, subscribe, comment, send this around to people. Let me know what you enjoyed about these episodes. Let me know your feedback. It really helps me to figure out what is resonating with you so I can better tap in to what that is, so I can give you what you need and find that middle ground between what I need to express and what actually resonates with you. It's like a middle ground, it's a give and take. So please let me know, leave a comment below, leave a great review. If you're listening on Spotify, give me a 5-star glowing review. Leave me a comment, follow, subscribe, and I wish you all the best in life. I wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. But I really do wish you a Merry Christmas. I wish you a Happy New Year. And I send you all the best, and I'll talk to you soon. Peace and love.